truth in love. I sing my truth in love. I walk in truth, I dream in truth. I am the truth of love.
A long time ago, there was a man who was in charge of his own Roman army. The backing of the world's most powerful empire behind him. And he had a servant whom he loved with all of his heart who fell sick, and after trying presumably all that Rome had to offer to heal the servant remained ill. And somehow this military leader was aware that there was, in the backwater hills of Galilee, there was a man who had legend of healing powers. So this military leader sent to retrieve him and bring him. And as this healing man came forth, the military leader thought, I'm not even worthy to have this guy in my house. And so he sent some friends out to interrupt him and say, hey, our boss has a servant who's sick, and we're wondering if you can heal him. And the military leader communicated, I understand what it's like to have power and authority. I trust that you can actually, from wherever you're at, you can speak a healing word, and it's enough. And so that is what Jesus did, and in that moment, the servant was healed. There's another woman who was about the same time who had been sick for about 12 years. This sort of bleeding condition. And she exhausted all of her life savings to try and find medical answers, only to be left with an empty bank account and a still bleeding condition. And she was one afternoon observing this crowd pass by and saw too this man from Nazareth who I guess healed people. And so she wormed her way through the crowd and thought, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, if I can just get close enough to maybe get some of his mojo, that might be enough. And so sure enough, she gets close and touches the hem of Jesus' garment, at which point Jesus is like, whoa, what just happened? Who touched me? And you know the story. His disciples are like, yo, bro, lots of people around here. There ain't no social distancing. Lots of people have been touching you for a long time. And he said, no, this is different. I felt something. And he sees this woman, and she's healed. Also about that time, there was a woman in a neighboring village called Canaan. She was a Canaanite woman, you might even say, and she had a daughter who had succumbed to what I guess they call demon possession. Now look, I don't really know what to do with that. Maybe it was a legit demon possessing, or maybe that was how they talked about extreme mental health conditions. Don't know. For this point, don't care. Point is that the Canaanite mother had a daughter who was sick. And again, she heard, pray tell, of this healer from a different religion, really, a different people group. And she found her way to Jesus and sought out healing for her daughter. At which point, you might recall the story, the disciples were like, send this woman away. And Jesus is like, I'm just here, for the people of Israel. I'm not here for Canaanites. But then do you remember hashtag nevertheless she persisted, right? And so she's like, no, for reals, my daughter needs your help. And Jesus heals the daughter. Last story. There's another woman about that time who broke her way into the home of a Pharisee who was hosting a dinner party for Jesus. And if you recall, she has this jar of really expensive oil, and she makes her way to Jesus and sort of kneels down and breaks this jar of oil and anoints Jesus' feet and dries it with her hair and her tears. And you remember how the Pharisees were flipping a lid because this woman, all that we know about her was what her name was, and her name was Sinner. Like capital S, Sinner. That's all we know about her, this woman, Sinner. And the Pharisees are flipping out that Jesus would even allow this interaction to happen. And of course, Jesus has this beautiful thing to say about the situation. And he says to this woman, your sins are forgiven you. What's up, Nashville? How you doing? Hey, Jeremiah, can you turn my mic up a little bit? I'm not entirely sure they're with me this morning. It's good to be here with you. What a beautiful city you have. I know David's been apologizing that the weather is a little bit gray, and I told him, look, y'all, I come from San Diego. I get perfect weather 95% of the time. I can handle a bit of this, all right? I'm okay. But really, really pretty city. This is really my first time hanging out in Nashville, so I look forward to being here for the week. As David mentioned, I'm kind of working my way through the country right now, talking about the second book of mine called The Shift, which is kind of like a survival guide for when you have left or been kicked out of your more conservative religious context, and you still want to have some connection to the tradition of Christianity, but you know instinctively, intuitively that it has to be more open, inclusive, and progressive, and so you're making your way toward this kind of Christianity, and I'm trying to help anticipate or show you some of the obstacles that myself and many of the people that I've pastored over the years have gone through as we've made this shift. So today what I want to share with you is a little bit about one of my sort of underlying pillars or foundational truth, one of the main values that for me undergirds a lot of the book and a lot of the work that I do these days. And I started with those 4 stories for this reason, because to me, there is this fascinating connection in these stories that I want to share with you a bit about. This interesting interaction between faith and being saved or healed. For instance, in that first story to the Roman centurion whose servant was sick, Jesus says about the centurion, he says, "Never have I haven't even seen this great of faith in all of Israel." And in that moment, the servant was healed. To the woman who had found her way to Jesus and who was stuck bleeding for those 12 years, Jesus says, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." And to the Canaanite mother whose daughter was ill with demon possession, Jesus says to her, "You have great faith. Your daughter will be healed." And then to the woman known only as sinner, Jesus says, "How beautiful is your faith. Go in peace." So there's this connection in all 4 of these stories between this act, this demonstration, something about faith, and then being saved and or healed. And that's what I want to explore with you for just a moment here. Now, the first thing I want to say about this is that oftentimes these stories have been told or read or taught from, and the impression that we get, my mind just went to Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. It's the impression that I get. Okay, moving on. Whoa, come back to me here, bud. So the impression that is often got with these stories is this, that somewhere out there is a God, that if we can believe the right things, or believe hard enough, petition mightily enough, gather enough, then there might be a point at which God is like, snaps those like divine digits, and then blammo, there's a healing going on. Like, this is the impression that we get with these stories. You just gotta believe correctly or pray hard enough or whatever it is, and then cool, you get the healing. But Spero, y'all, I got a bit of a problem with that for a couple of reasons. One, I think it puts way too much pressure on you and me to get it right. Do you know what I mean? Like, if that is the formula to believe the right thing or just pray hard enough, that's a lot of pressure to get it right. And then secondarily, I think it also, we end up getting stuck with an idea of a God who possesses the capacity to dole out a healing to individuals and yet is kind of withholdy with it. You know what I mean? Like, could do it. Not for you, not for you. Oh, but you I like. You're good. Not you, not you. Again, this is just not a God I'm super drawn to. So I don't really love these interpretations of these stories. But here, guess what? I'm not here to just tear down a barn. I want to help offer you some planks to start building a new one, if you want. Okay? So here's what I think might be going on in these. I'll just offer this to you, and you can do with it what you will. I read these stories, and what stands out to me is that these are people who, you might say, are at the end of their rope. okay? These are people who are at the end of their rope. Like they have met this perpetual sense of disappointment or disillusionment and the hardships of life, and this is where we meet them in the story. So you have the military leader who, as I mentioned, has the backing of Rome, the world's most powerful empire, and yet what he discovers is that at the end of the day, the world's strongest, most elite political force is really meaningless when it comes to his servant being deathly ill. Just actually doesn't help. The woman stuck bleeding, you get the sense that she had invested all of her money and tried to find medical answers and was left with, again, just the condition of bleeding still. Money didn't solve it for her. Science didn't solve it for her. The mother of the demon-possessed daughter, she was a part of an entirely different religious way of life. And I'm only left to assume that one of the reasons why she transcended cultural boundaries to seek out Jesus was because she had tried religion. And it didn't help. And then the woman known as Sinner, I read this story and I'm like, here's a woman who knows what she did, but I can almost guarantee you that what she did involved other people. And I bet these other people get to be called their names still. And this woman has now been given a label by her community, has been told who she is, what she is, has found sort of the edges of society and community and maybe even family, and has realized, man, even that has the potential to leave me with what? So these are stories of people who have found the edges of whether it's politics or money or science or religion or even the value of community and family. And there's a point at which we hit the edges of these things and we discover, maybe they don't hold all the answers. Maybe they don't hold all the answers. Now, I think for me, one of the reasons why I think the Bible has had a kind of staying power over the years, and I get that in a room like this, there are probably all manner of different attitudes toward the Bible, right? And based on what I know about you and what I know about David, like it all belongs here, okay? Like you're good, for wherever you're at on the spectrum of how you hold the Bible. For me, one of the things that I love about the Bible, why I think it has staying power, is because you get these moments, you get these stories like this where you get to zoom in on an individual's life or in a moment in individual's life, and you see this very particular instance of a thing happening, and somehow this particular instance has a way of bringing to light a universal reality. Who in this room can relate? This is rhetorical. You don't have to raise your hands. I won't call you out. But who can relate to feeling like, politics have let me down? Who in this room can relate to this sense of, you know what? Sometimes the medical system kind of sucks. Who in this room has maybe made the amount of money that you thought in your life, once I make that amount of money, I'll be happy? And maybe it didn't go as you expected. Or who among you have, this one probably doesn't apply, but has anyone in this room ever found like maybe religion's let you down? Where you thought, I know this is true for me, where I thought if I just do it right, say the right things, believe the right things, do the right rituals, go to the right small groups, study the Bible enough, pray enough, good gravy. Like I just thought if I just did it right, then I don't know, what, Colby? Finish that sentence. Then what? I don't know. I think the story was I'd be insulated from the hardships of life. But then you say it out loud and you're like, that's absurd. And yet that's how I lived. That's how many of us live. We get sideswiped by life and we're like, but I've been doing my devotions. Okay. And then, and then, is there anyone among us who can relate to feeling as though your community just doesn't get you? Society doesn't have a space for you. Your family has decided who you are and what you are. So I think for me, one of the reasons why I still, even after being burned by religion so many times, one of the reasons why I come back to the Bible periodically, not every day, y'all, I ain't crazy. But I still return to the Bible every once in a while because I see these moments, these stories that have a way of universally bringing to life what is most deep and real and true. I get the sense that the people in these stories experience the limitations of their environments in a way that exposed them to the fragility of their humanity. And this is really kind of what separates us from most of the animal kingdom, isn't it? We have this existential awareness that we're going to die. You knew that, right? Death comes for us all. And that causes us to freak out on all sorts of levels. And it becomes particularly acute when some of the most powerful and or well-known and or strongest entities let us down. Systems let us down. Politics, money, science, religion, community. It's when it becomes particularly acute. Like, holy cow, I'm on this space rock hurtling through the never-ending galaxy and my life is just a passing in the wind. And we find these moments in life where we're confronted with, we accidentally, I don't know that we do it intentionally, but we accidentally put our hope in things like a particular politician or political party. We put our hope in physical health, if we can just make sure we eat right. And actually, we put our hope in the size of our bank account. We put our hope in religion, family, and we wake up some days finding ourselves frustrated, disappointed, disillusioned, cynical. Okay, real quick, let me go back to this connection between, in these four stories, this connection between faith and some stories says you were saved, some stories was healed. And I want to explore what caused Jesus to say what he did? Like, what was the thing? And you look at the three stories of the three women, and what you notice is that each of them are described as like kneeling or as like prostrating, as like there's this act of sort of just throwing themselves at Jesus. And then even with the Roman centurion, you have this humility of like, man, I don't even know that like I'm worthy enough to be in your sight. And so what you get this impression that there is this humility, this openness, this posture of just here am I. And I think oftentimes, Spero, what can happen, the second thing that I think happens in these stories sometimes by way of maybe a misunderstanding or misinterpretation, if I dare say so, is I think oftentimes people read these stories and they read your faith, and Jesus says something like your faith has saved you or your faith has healed you. And they end up communicating this idea of the supremacy of Christianity. And so the assumption often is that, oh, these four people, they became Christian. And that's why Jesus says, your faith has saved you. Can I just point out for just a quick hot second that at that point in time, there was no such thing as being a Christian? Okay? So even on that level alone, these stories do not rise and fall on these individuals like converting to the right religion. They can't. Okay, so this isn't about them becoming Christians. So when Jesus says your faith has saved you, and the other part of this is oftentimes it gets sort of assumed, not only that they become Christian, but it's assumed that there is some sort of belief happening in these people's minds. Like, As though they come to Jesus and they have this theological acquiescence that you are the second person in the Trinity and you are God. No, this is not how any of them believed at that time. This just wasn't in their consciousness. This wasn't how they came to these moments in their lives. Okay, so there was no theological belief about some sort of divinity of Jesus, certainly not about death and resurrection. What? You know what I mean? So this isn't about people becoming Christian. This is not the faith that saved them, is my point. What I think impressed Jesus, or at least what led Jesus to say to these individuals, never have I seen such great faith, or your faith has saved you, your faith has healed you, your faith has saved you, go in peace. What seems to me to have impressed Jesus is that these individuals all have this posture of humility. And even humility, I recognize as oftentimes like a baggage-tinged religious word that maybe some of us cringe at for understandable reasons. So I kind of prefer to think about openness. I just think these four individuals had this openness to them. This openness. A sense of, I can't figure this thing out on my own. I can't. Not only that, but my religion has failed me. My political party has failed me. Science has failed me. Guys, I thought we were just supposed to follow the science. Which science? Just follow the science. Okay, sometimes it doesn't work. Sorry, that felt like that got a little, blood pressure okay in here? I'm not sure what happened out there, but something happened. No, I'm just kidding. These people are like, they get to the end of, I can't figure this out on my own. And it's as though they're like, all I have left is me. So that's what I have to give. Me. That's it. The image of surrender comes to mind. Where these individuals hit this point where they've sort of faced up with the reality that if there's any hope for them, if there's any hope for themselves or any hope for their loved ones, then clearly it was beyond them. It was beyond their capacity, their resources, their systems. It was beyond. You might even say, and I'm working on a phrase here, I don't know if it'll catch on, but you might even say they let go and let God. It'll never catch on. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know, friends, what actually happened in these stories. I don't know if people physically got healed, okay? I don't know. Maybe mystical, magical things like that did happen and or do happen. I don't know, not the point. Maybe it was like a psychological, maybe there's an explanation behind it, or maybe these were just sort of exaggerated stories, legends that grew up as a way for people to try to articulate what it felt like, what their experience was being around this person. I don't entirely know exactly, but what I find interesting in these stories is that where Jesus says that your faith has saved you, I want to look at these. The word faith here, the Greek word in these stories, and usually where you read faith in the New Testament, the Greek word behind that is the Greek word pistis. Your pistis has saved you. And then when you look at these words saved, or in another story, healed, saved, the Greek word is sozo, and oftentimes it gets translated as saved, but what happens when we read saved in our English Bibles? We end up thinking that means like go to heaven when we die. But sozo doesn't have anything really to do with life after death. Sozo is about an experience here and now, and oftentimes a better translation than saved would be like rescued or liberated, or my favorite, to be made whole. Whew, how good is that? And then the healed, the word healed, the Greek word is iomai. And again, it can have a connotation of being healed, but another way to think about it is to being put back together, to be made whole. Your pistis has sozoed you. Let me go back to pistis for a second, because again, if we just translate it as faith, we end up thinking, what happens when we read faith in the English Bibles? We end up thinking your beliefs, your ideas, the things that you think appear. But this is not, I submit to you, this is not the best way to understand this Greek word pistis. Pistis wasn't really about faith as it relates to beliefs. Pistis was about faith as it relates to action. Pistis would be better translated as trust, a posture of trust. All right, I want to illustrate what I mean between pistis as belief versus pistis as trust. I need 4 volunteers real quick. Just 4 people to come on up and just kind of gather right here. 4 people. Come on, give everybody the gift of not having to come up here by you coming up here. Just come 4 people right here real quick. Thank you. There's 1. Thank you. 2, 3. We are 75% way there. And 4, thank you in the very back. Oh, you were too slow. You were too slow. All right, so if you'll come stand right here. Yep, and then you stand right here on the stage, and then you, sir, come stand right over here and face each other, and then you come stand right here and face each other. I should have asked, like, how do you feel about touching people? But just for a second, if you're comfortable with it, reach out and kind of hold each other's, like, wrists. You know, just kind of get a nice, maybe turn, yeah, okay, right? Ready? You got a real good grip? Oh, gosh. Okay, now. Okay. David, are we okay? All right, we got the go-ahead. Now, this I submit to you, friends. I call this a belief stand. Okay, thank you. You've been great. Go back to your seats. That's a belief stand, right? Where you just sort of stand there and you're like, you know what? If I were to fall, I bet I'd be caught. I'm good. I believe that I would be caught if I fell. I believe it. That's like pistis as belief, where you just sort of have the thing appear where you can check a box, where you can write out a theological, doctrinal statement. That's a belief, but you're not really doing anything at that point, which is why, what is that usually called? A trust fall, right? And a trust fall, actually, you do the thing where you fall backwards, right? This to me is the heart of what pistis is. It's a trust. This is why in my book I try to start right off the bat, encourage people to recalibrate their thinking around faith, not as a noun, not as a thing that we possess. Faith isn't a thing that we have. Because here's what happens if we think about faith as a thing that we have. If we think about faith as a thing that we have, as like a collection of the things that we believe, then what ends up happening is we think of our beliefs as like a Jenga tower. And every one of our beliefs that we sort of build, or more likely is built for us by our friends and our family and our community and our churches and our schools. And we have this Jenga tower of beliefs. And then at times we might get to these points in our lives where we realize that politics or religion or faith or family or money or science has let us down. And so we start to audit our faith. And we take out these blocks of this Jenga tower of our religion and we look at them and we turn them around and we investigate them. And sometimes we think to ourselves, I don't like that belief anymore. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't work at all for anyone. And we throw it away. Other times we take the beliefs and we think, actually, you know what? I kind of like this, but I'm going to turn it a bit, and put it back on top. I'm going to keep it, but it's going to be different. But here's what often happens, and here's what I find when people go through the shift, is what happens is the Jenga tower sometimes collapses all the way and there's nothing left. And then people end up thinking to themselves, I've lost my faith. Or what happened to my faith? Or I used to have faith, but I don't know anymore. What you mean is, or what I think you mean is, I don't have some of my beliefs anymore. What I suggest to you is it's actually your faith. Stay with me now. It's actually your faith that leads you to the auditing of all these beliefs. When you go through any kind of shift where you leave behind some beliefs or change others, it's not that your faith is broken. Your faith is doing what it's supposed to do. Your faith is doing what it's supposed to do. So I see in these stories, I see Jesus interacting with individuals who have reached the end of their rope in these various ways, and they throw themselves open in this posture of openness, this posture of trust, pistis, and it is that Jesus says, your pistis has sozoed you. Your trust, your openness has made you whole. It's put you back together. So I'll end with this. I think there is a kind of salvation, a kind of wholeness that happens when we embody this posture of trust and openness. And the kicker for me is this, that the specific kind of faith/trust that gets wrapped up in pistis, it really can only begin in a deep place of vulnerability and weakness. When you've got nothing left. Friends, I suggest to you that the path to wholeness begins in weakness. The path to wholeness begins when your family has given you a label that you never asked for, you don't deserve. Your path to wholeness begins when you realize that this politician, this political party, they're not going to save us. That's not where our salvation is. Our path to wholeness begins when we have almost quite literally, or at least millennial literally, slow burn. Some of you will get that later. When we've literally lost everything. We have nothing left but ourselves. And we give that.
Closer to the light, moss and winged things come nearer. Their own tiny sun. You're the only one I could love, that I could love like this. Tied my hopes to wings of doves, hope it's enough. I pray to God this sticks. I've been wishing on a star, reckless dreaming in the dark. You're the only one I could love, the only one I could love like this. Deepest kind of sea, even deeper these oceans. Every boundless one, you're the only one I could love, that I could love like this. Tied my hopes to wings of doves, hope it's enough. I pray to God this sticks. I've been wishing on a star, reckless dreaming in